So what are the interesting bits of a form? Well, they're what questions do I want to ask? How do I want to ask them? How can I make sure that the person filling them in has done so correctly or correctly enough? And what can I do with their answers once they've been put into that form? So once you put in the bespoke front end and the ability to integrate with literally any system that's addressable across the internet, then you have a very, very powerful tool set. So if I just want to start quickly showing some of the things that combination of behaviors makes possible. So this is one of our live services that's running on UX Forms. So this is with the Intellectual Property Office, UK government department that looks after trademarks, Gavin mentioned at the start of the call. So this is the live service for applying to register a trademark. It's an incredibly complicated user journey. I think the last time I looked at it, it had a cyclomatic complexity of something like 60, and the flow through the different screens within the form is horrendous. It's all sorts of forward and back logic. Your journey, the questions that you see when you go forwards through the form are not in the same order as the questions that you see if you want to go back through the form, back where you came from. It's a very, very complicated user journey. It costs them a lot of money to build this the first time around before we then put it onto UX Forms. So that's just one thing. So there's no hint that this is a UX Forms thing. This is purely governmental service. But because you then get the complete control over the payload, your forms can look like literally anything you want. So this is a little form that we knocked up for one of Equal Experts' other business practices. We chose to put a logo on because we did it as a freebie for this other department. It doesn't have to be there, like you can see. So again, a very, very different flavor of form. Or even if you get through to something like this, as a demo that we knocked up for the Abu Dhabi judicial department about raising a claim against an employer. The point where we've got little things like we've got some conditional behavior about whether you've got a lawyer or not, you have to put an address in, but also starts to show off some of the other benefits you get from using an already built platform. So for instance, we can support internationalization out of the box. So that's the same form instance in flight. All you have to literally do is supply a translation of the copy, and then UX Forms takes care of the rest. In the same way that UX Forms takes care of persisting stuff to the database, it takes care of putting the right text in the right places. It does all of that. But then also, once you start to talk about some more interesting user journeys, they could be around making use of these data integrations. So we made sure that you could put an integration hook literally at every place in that user journey. And so you can implement in code to implement literally anything you can think of. So it's just code. So you can make calls out to remote services in whatever way that remote service can support. So in this case, in order to even just render this view, so this is a live form in UX Forms, again running with the Intellectual Property Office. This has performed a SOAP call back to their private SOAP services that happen to be built in .NET. It's understood that payload response and transformed that response into a set of common UI components that the IPO themselves have built in UX Forms in order to render this response. So we can click through to one of these results and see what the authoritative URL of a trademark in the UK looks like, if it wasn't for the service looking a little bit slow at the moment, which is the joy of live demos. But the idea is that because we can pull data in from anywhere, you can get any data in or out. And so then the sorts of journeys that you're able to build start to become right up that end of before you would have to build a bespoke platform from scratch because you had no option. Now with something like UX Forms, you have another option. So another tool that can handle the sorts of complexity that's the sort of things that enterprises deal with day in, day out. So also then wanted to look at what are the other sorts of things that you typically need in these sorts of tools. So to build up these sorts of user journeys. So you typically look at things like branching and conditional logic, which is normally based on previous answers to other questions. So if you answered yes to this question, then instead of jumping to section 7, you just get presented the next question immediately. You don't know that you've been sent down the other leg of the trousers in that journey. Okay, so let's take this form's back again now. And here we are. So we can see again, so cool, all the different trademarks registered by Equal Experts. We can click through to yet another form. So this is now the authoritative URL of Equal Experts for their registered logo, which is quite cute. So yeah, so you can start to build very, very complex journeys, especially when you start to bring these together. So if you could imagine a whole section within a form, say, but that section's only brought into scope, it should only be asked based on some conditions. So those conditions could be answers to previous questions, or it can be a call out to a remote system. So you can have a rules engine sitting in your estate somewhere that's responsible for making those sorts of calls, and you can make the form do its branching and conditional logic based on that, on that remote rules engine that's managed a completely different way. And because everything's API based, it's all about playing nicely in the sorts of enterprise ecosystems that we expect to be building traditionally bespoke services in. So you can make calls out, you can make calls in, we can build very, very complex journeys with that. The other major criteria, again, like Werner sort of touched on, is around who your user base is and what capabilities they have. So again, the UK government has done some excellent research into that. This WK theme that you're looking at, what the recognizable gov.uk styling is the result of hundreds of man years of effort into exactly that question, and they've come up with a set of very, very good rules and guidelines for what services need to be able to do and how they need to work in order to support the full breadth of digital users in the UK. And some of these rules are very, very simple, but again, trip up a huge tool set. So for instance, you can't use JavaScript, or at least you can use JavaScript, but can only ever be used as progressive enhancement. So that means all of the UI toolkits that all of the cool kids use these days are out. There's no React app for you. You can't use it. It's not allowed, unless you can prove with user research that your particular set of user cohort has got those. Anyway, so that's. But essentially, general rule of thumb: the service has to work without JavaScript enabled. So again, big limiting technical factor. Throws out a lot of tools. Throws out a lot of tool sets and technology sets. UX Forms has been built explicitly to be able to handle that. So what does that mean? How does it really work? So UX Forms is a hosted, managed, multi-tenant forms platform. So it's already live, it's already up and running, it's already been pen tested, it's already on the various government procurement frameworks. So all of those other barriers that you've got for building new services, or even just migrating services, there's path to live, the CI deployment, the infrastructure scripting, all of that's now just a solved problem. That's not on your project roadmap at all. That's just done. Instead, you can build forms in a almost like a DSL lightweight language that lets you focus purely on those core things that we said that you need to do. So we can have a look at an example of a form running here. So this is a demo that we built for the Canadian government. We were speaking to a little while back about their passport renewal journey, and so what that might look like. So again, it's a straightforward form journey. It's only this part. It's got some conditionality and stuff, but that's all fine. But what does that look like? So we come into the form. We've got some access control on it because we chose to put that on there. Now we're in. So the idea of this is that what does defining a form look like, and how simple can that be? And let's look at that. So this literally, these 4 lines here are all you need to write in order to make this entire page work. That gets you a production-ready, battle-hardened live service that asks these 4 questions in a way that just works. So we have a UI component called an input text. You give it a name to associate the answer that someone gives. We've got some messages, which is a properties bundle, so all the text that gets applied to that. And then in this case, we've got some validation constraints. So it's a way so that the field is required and that the answer has got a maximum length of 255 characters. And that's literally it. Absolutely everything else about keeping track of the user journey, about getting the cookies right, about getting the HTTP headers right, about getting the security, about getting the caching, about getting the persistence, about user tracking. Everything else is just done. So that's literally all you have to write. So if we decided that actually this form's not great, asking you about someone's surname before their forenames is a bit weird, say, then we can just change that. So let's swap those two things around. So given name onto surname, go into our build tool, redeploy that form. So it's going to, in this case, it's going to delete the version that was there before, rebuild a new one, deploy it via APIs into this running platform, refresh the page, and then the given name is now the first question that we're asking instead of the last one. And again, the platform takes care of upgrading your form live as people are filling it in. So you can even add new questions to your form that are mandatory, they must complete, into a form and deploy it live whilst people are using it. And UX forms will take care of managing those user journeys to make sure that they also then complete that new data that was just essentially thrown on them whilst they were halfway through filling the form in. Again, so it's all of these sorts of sort of wizened, battle-hardened behaviors that, certainly in my experience, no project team thinks of at the start when they talk about, well, it's just a form, isn't it? We can just throw a couple of fields together in web framework of choice and it will just work. And it's really cheap and we can then just go home. Well, actually you can't. Not by the time you've started to look at all the other things that you need around it to make sure that this is a fully rounded production service. Even simple things like, what happens if the form is down? What page are you going to show then? How are you going to handle that? So all of those behaviors are already in and done. And one of the most important things I want to show, just to round this off, is that because you've got UX forms handling this user interaction for you, UX forms can also automatically capture metadata about those interactions. So in this case, we've been looking at, so these are all the different forms that we've got deployed to UX forms. So we can have a look, in this case, at the metadata for this particular form. In which case we're not got a lot here, because it's just a little demo environment. But for instance, we can see the sorts of data that we capture automatically, which lets your user research team drill down into how your entire cohort of people is experiencing your form live. So this then can give them real data to say, hang on a minute, we're seeing this given name question, that's tripped up a whole load of validation failures. That means a whole bunch of people have either not understood the question or they've put a wrong answer in there somehow, which they've not understood it properly. So that's going to be quite a good candidate to focus our research efforts on next, as to make this question better. You know, do we want to reword it? Do we want to use a different type of UI component to get them to fill this in somehow? Is there something different we can do here? And then the real kicker is, when you deploy a new version of this form, you then start capturing that real data. And so again, for sort of enterprise scale services, typically you've got, you can do user research with 5, 10, 15, 20 people sometimes. Then it starts to get a bit hairy to get sort of good, useful face-to-face information back. But if your service is being used by 20 million people, the statistical significance of your findings is going to be, shall we say, quite a low number. So you can back up your in-person findings, or even just the best educated guess of your team's findings to make the change. Doesn't matter how you make the change. With the real data back, is this actually working in practice for everybody? And you can use that to inform your cycles about improving your service for end users, which then means that you can can be really informed about how well your service is behaving and what you can do to make it better, which is one of the key things for all